All right, now we're live on air. Don't have any viewers left yet, but people will start popping in and start viewing in a couple of minutes. But yeah, for some of you guys who don't know, I'm going to make this announcement. I will no longer be teaching anymore. Some regulations have been changed in the school district that I'm currently working in, and so I actually had to step down or actually change profession and change career paths. And so I'm going back to college so I can get training in another field. And so once I get done these college courses in a couple months, I'll most likely get an internship at a company and I'll start another career path going a separate way than teaching. But honestly, um, another reason why I'm actually stepping down from teaching is it doesn't pay that well. Teaching actually, if you want to get into a profession so you can make a lot of money, teaching isn't the way to go. And so I recommend, you could probably make more money being a waiter than being a teacher in the school district of Philadelphia. I mean, we don't get paid that well at all. And just to give you a quick rundown, I mean, I've gotten paychecks as a teacher where I think one paycheck I got was around $100. You work for 40 hours, you're working with other people's children, and then you get $100 paycheck, which isn't enough even for rent. And so that's how low your checks can get some days or some weeks. And I love it. I love the job itself, but ever since they changed the regulations where you got to have a certain degree, so you can keep on teaching, and then between getting all these different licenses and taking all these different tests and there's so many different requirements, it would just be better for me to just go get some training in another field for a few more months and get a separate career. And maybe in the next like 4 years, I'll come back to it. But I'm thinking about going back to school and get my doctorate. I mean, I wouldn't get that until probably like 20, 22 or 24 or something like that. But just something I've been thinking about since I'm already going back to college anyway. Going to this college tomorrow. I set up an appointment to go there tomorrow morning, check out the campus, get a rundown and everything. And in a few more months, I'll be working for another company. So that's about it. That's what's been going on with me. So now I guess I can say I'm a former high school science teacher now. But in the near future, God willing, I'll get back into the field and start teaching again in no time. But the YouTube channel definitely is still going to be up. I'm still going to be running a YouTube channel and talking about science and evolutionary creation and astrophysics and etc. As a matter of fact, for you guys who don't know, for the last 2 weeks, myself in general and Steve McCrae and the other guys in the Great Debate community, we've been interacting with reasons to believe. So first we got a chance to talk with Dr. Fazrana, and then we got a chance to talk to both Dr. Hugh Ross and Dr. Fazrana in the same hangout. And that was pretty cool. I didn't get a chance to download it and put it onto my YouTube channel yet. It's just for the fact that uploading those videos that are about like an hour or 2 hours long, it takes a long time. And so the video might be an hour long, but it'll take about 5 hours to upload, depending on like your broadband service and whatever. And so I just don't have the time right now. But in the near future, I guess I'll put it up. Or maybe what I could even do is I could download a Media Maker. I could download the video and like take a snippet of the entire video and just put the snippet where I ask a question on my channel. I'll think about doing it in the future. I've just been so busy with other things. Um, but as a matter of fact, I just wanted to have this hangout on the Trinity. Uh, it was in Steve McCrae's hangout the other day. We were talking about the Trinity and is accepting the doctrine of the Trinity an essential in, I guess, the Judeo-Christian faith, or even I would say Orthodox Christianity, because if somebody wants to say they're an Orthodox Christian, but they don't accept the Trinity, say that's almost heretical. I don't think it's necessarily salvational, whether you accept the Trinity or not. Um, because there's some people who never even heard of the Trinity. All they know is Jesus is Lord, Jesus rose from the dead, and Jesus is alive. But I do think that the Trinity is an essential doctrine for us Christians if we want to have the right understanding and theological concept of who God is. And I think understanding who God is properly is really important because if you say you believe in God, but all of your theological concepts of God only line up with the idea of God being the God of Islam, well, then you don't believe in the same God as the God of Christianity or, you know, etc. So when somebody says they don't believe in a Trinitarian God and they believe in a Unitarian God, obviously, if you have enough in-depth knowledge of Scripture, then you should know that they're not the same gods. And I think the Trinity is what makes God different. You only see God express himself or reveal himself to his creation in a Trinitarian nature from the God of the Bible. And that's what makes Christianity so different. But also, now that we have better understanding of string theory and extra dimensions and astrophysics, the doctrine of the Trinity actually gives that much more credence to Christianity and makes it that much more true. I think I actually said this to General maybe a couple minutes ago, maybe it was about an hour ago. I had put this on my Twitter page, but I had basically said, let me pull it up on my computer. Because it was like one of my last posts I had made on my Twitter. And just loading, give it a minute. Scrolling down now to see what I wrote because I want to quote myself verbatim. There you go. I said, the Trinity explains how a hyperdimensional God to his three-dimensional creation, demonstrating that God is personal. And so when we definitely do believe in God, I believe in a God that is beyond space and time, or he transcends space and time. And so I don't believe God is a Unitarian God who is, in a sense, stuck in this dimension. I don't think God is like a superhero, right? Because some people, I know it was Crash Course Philosophy, the guy who's the host of that show, he says, well, maybe God is like a superhero, right? Maybe God is like Thor or the Hulk or Spider-Man. But I would say no, God is so much more than that because God isn't a man. God, of course, is more than a man. So, you know, God being more than a man and God being outside of space and time, he transcends space and time. So he will actually be hyperdimensional. He exists in a multitude of different dimensions, or I guess you could even say God exists in eternal dimensions where God cannot be contained. He exists in uh, dimensions that we can't even fathom. It just goes on and on and on and on. So maybe, you know, there's a dimension past the 11th dimension that we just can't perceive, which is almost what string theory even supposes or proposes. String theory proposes that um, there's a dimension holding everything together, and then within this dimension there's different dimensions, etc. And as you keep on going up to like the 11th dimension, maybe there's another dimension farther than that, but we just can't perceive it. And I guess like in a sense we would never even know because we're limited by space and time. But the Trinity actually helps us make sense of like even string theory, um, because that actually would be in a sense true from a biblical perspective, right? Like there are about 11 dimensions that we know about, but if God exists, this God would be hyperdimensional, and so this God would exist in more dimensions than the 11th dimension. And so string theory would in a sense be correct theologically. We wouldn't have like the scientific proof for it yet, but that's one of the predictions I guess that a biblical creation model could propose, right? That God exists in a multitude of different dimensions. So I guess we'll have to see whoever finds that out. There's going to be a real good Nobel Prize in it for them. I think Brian Greene, he has a good explanation of it, but I don't know if he's actually doing experiments on it right now. And I got to do some research on who's actually doing experiments and all of this stuff. But the Trinity is one of the things you could just talk about for hours and hours and hours and hours. So. And one of Steve's hangouts, the guy, I think he was a non-believer actually. He said, "It's hard to talk about the Trinity without committing one heresy or another." I thought that was pretty funny. Oh, General, you bet. Let me present you. Looks like you're about to start sharing something with us.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm back. Got a little bit of a sore throat, but it'll be all right. Yeah, so Wayne, this is my my fifth study in Ephesians, and specifically dealing with the phrase in Ephesians 3, verse 18, where Paul's like, in regards to the love of Jesus, what's wide, long, high, and deep. And so in the midst of the study, I go through a lot of dimensional talk, and down here at page 7, I start to speak about God's proximity in relation to us, with using the analogy of a computer screen. And yeah, it goes right in line with the Trinity doctrine. So I don't know if you want to go through this. It's up to you.
Well,
Really.
I'm gonna tell you the truth. I don't really have time to go through all of it, but if you could just talk about the computer screen analogy, and we can keep it brief because I do have to go to bed in a little bit. But I'll tell you what, if we're free like anytime, like the rest of this week, we can go through the whole thing. But I just got to get to bed early for tomorrow. But yeah, just break down the computer analogy. This is interesting.
Okay. I guess I'll what, 15 minutes on this, 15, 20 minutes is around that time, and then you go to bed.
Yeah, that's fine. That'll work. Wayne, are you still there? I don't know what happened to you. I don't know if you're still here, if you dropped your phone or what.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just listening.
Okay. I'll just very brief. I won't read through all this, but I'll just very briefly get into why, why is there the Milky Way? Like, what has Ephesians got to do with the Milky Way here, and where am I going with it? So basically, it's to do with the fact that in verse 15, Paul has this phrase. I just zoom in on it. He says, "This is the reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven," notice this, family in heaven and on earth receives its name. And so I go into, and this is where I asked Dr. Ross in Steve's Hangout, the principle of plenitude, and how Dr. Ross responded, but that it's quite a possibility. So in the early church, they actually, and here's Jerome writing on this, that there could be creatures in the universe that exist because of God, and then they become what's called fathers. So at the end of the quote, he says, yeah, it makes it possible for other creatures to be called fathers. So there could be, extraterrestrial life. And so from there, what I do is I go into the astrophysics based on the feasibility. So I write here, so a point should be made in regards to ET. We have seen above that Christians can explain the reality of the gospel if ET exists. However, is it possible that they can ever reach us? And so I go through the science of the fact that the universe is so large that you're talking near impossible to for ET to ever reach us. And then I speak about the size of our own galaxy, and then start speaking about wormholes and things like that, which then leads into the multidimensional perspective. So if I come down to, over here, So Paul is telling us that the love of the Messiah, exemplified in his magnanimity to every human, is too large to be confined by any geometrical measurements in our 10-dimensional universe. And he uses the terms wide, long, high, and deep. So it is wide enough to reach the whole world and beyond. It is long enough to stretch from eternity to eternity. It is high enough to raise both Gentiles and Jews to the heavenly realm. And it is deep enough to rescue people from sin's degradation. Now, notice the language. This could only be speaking about a being, in this case Jesus, who at least operates in 11 dimensions, like beyond the 10 dimensions we know. And doesn't that fit the Trinity model? Because, for example, here's a quote from Interstellar. This is a screenshot from the movie, and this quote fits perfectly what Paul's getting at, where Dr. Brandt, I think her name is, she says, love is the one thing that we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space. And Marius Victorinus, a church father, writes that, God is through all and in all and is all things and the source of all. But notice how he says, how all these exist together or may be understood to exist in God, and according to these aspects, now look at this, requires another higher comprehension. So because he's living in the time that, they didn't have string theory. They didn't have, quantum mechanics and higher order physics and things like that. So he says, this thing that we believe in, this Trinity, requires a higher comprehension. And then when we go again to Ambrosiaster and Jerome, so look at Jerome, what he writes here. The consequence is that one, so the human, draws near as a neighbor, either to those things above or to those below. Whatever it begins to advance one's path toward better things so as to rise to the heavenly height. That is what Paul is calling length. So he's anticipating dimensions here. And this is Jerome. And so this is where I give the analogy of, so this photo here, we can see Mr. and Mrs. Flat on a sphere. So our situation, well, let me read from here. So through special relativity, we learned that no absolute frame of reference exists for measuring motions in space. Through general relativity, we learned one reason for that impossibility, that the universe's matter and energy reside on a three-dimensional surface of a 4D system. So the 4D being, you have a three-dimensional universe expanding, so space is stretching, so time is involved in that. And to give that illustration, here's a three-dimensional sphere with two-dimensional beings on it, but they don't know the center of the sphere. No matter where you are on the sphere, to you it looks like it's the center. So let's get into the computer screen now. So here we have a three-dimensional hand, and here you have two-dimensional beings on screen land. And so here we see Mr. and Mrs. Flat as 2D beings confined to the plane of length and width on the computer screen. A 3D human can approach that plane from the depth dimension and place a fingertip just 10 to the negative 35 meters. Now this is, as far as positions go, this can be the closest you can get to an object. So it's called a Planck length. So from the body of either one of them. So this fingertip can hover just above Mr. or Mrs. Flat. And you know what the fascinating thing about that is? They will never know that there's this being just hovering just above them, because they only operate in two dimensions. So they don't have an up point of view. They can only look left and right. So despite this close proximity, Mr. and Mrs. Flat would be unable to detect the fingertips' presence much less understand and describe its physical characteristics. As close as they may come to each other on the screen, they will remain unable to detect. And now let me just skip down. In this simple analogy, just one dimension separates them from us 3D humans. And yet the advantage of the plus one dimension suffices to explain how we could be closer to them than they are to each other. So notice, Mr. and Mrs. Flat, they could be hugging each other, but an extra dimensional being, in this case with just one more dimension, can actually interact inside each one of these people. They may, so for example, when you hug your mom, but God, who's transcendent, can actually pierce the inner thoughts of your hearts, for example, much beyond that that any human being can conceive. So imagine now this is the illustration of a three-dimensional being interacting with the universe of a two-dimensional universe. So, well, and notice what I write here. Before I get to that, God's dimensional advantage over us goes far beyond this 1D difference. He can operate in at least 10 dimensions established by string theory and beyond. His capacity to maintain close and comprehensive contact with us, despite our incapacity to experience him physically through our space-bound dimensions, becomes a comprehensible reality. So at least the physics is complex enough to make these analogies so that we can sort of put the pieces to the puzzle, sort of, just to have a glimpse of how he operates. So that means the doctrine of the Trinity could not have originated by men. I mean, think about it. Like, imagine men in the first century originating this thing. It's impossible. That's why you have things like the Islamic Tawheed, because it's a man-made. It makes sense to men. Therefore, obviously, that it didn't originate from Allah or God, because if men can understand it, then obviously that means it's derived from men. So the fact that this idea was presented through Jesus obviously showcases it's beyond this world. So here's a three-dimensional being sticking his finger into the two-dimensional screen, and the cross-section of his three-dimensional finger will appear as a two-dimensional circle that you can see there. And say if the hand went into a, instead of going perpendicular, like directly in, say it went near to the side, you'll have like an eclipse appearing, as you see in this photo. Or say if the hand put 4 fingers in, then you'll have 4 circles appearing. So this is where it gets a little bit humorous. Notice you have, at one moment, that person with the hand puts in just the 1 finger, so it's 1 circle. In another moment, the person puts in 4 fingers, so it's 4 circles, right? So we can well imagine the debates between Mr. and Mrs. Flat, who saw dots, lines, circles, ellipses. We can imagine at some point that Mr. Flat establishes the church of the 3 circles, while Mrs. Flat establishes the church of the 1 circle. The great irony of the disagreement about the higher being is that none of these churches have a tiny clue about who the being is and what that being can do. So basically it's to communicate both, that, how when we see in the Bible, God is 1 and yet 3, that sort of thing. And so here's a most fascinating point. How many of us are willing to admit that God soars infinitely above the horizon of our 10-dimensional realm? Notice that in this analogy, it's only a -1 dimension difference. But in our perspective, we have a -7 dimensions short of God's realm. That's 7 orders difference compared to this -1 in just the analogy. So look at this. Mr. and Mrs. Flat, mathematically, Mr. and Mrs. Flat underestimated the three-dimensional hand's reality by a factor of 10 to the 12. That's a trillion. So now that's just with one dimension. You have a 10 to the 12 underestimation. So the extra 7 dimensions from our perspective means it's 10 to the 12 to the power of 10 to the 12 to the power of 10 to the 12, 7 times. So that's a huge underestimation of God's nature. And we might as well make it, infinity, infinity, infinity 7 times. And so this is why, when we speak about, as Christians, we say, yeah, God is infinitely greater than we can think or imagine. But we never actually realize that the attributions of just a first order infinite, so first order being just the 10 to the 12 by itself, or this first infinity down here, let alone the other powers. So never realizing that the attributions of just a first order infinity to God absurdly underestimates them. We verbally acknowledge his immeasurable power, grace, wisdom, love, yet our prayers, concerns, actions, and attitude treat him as one who is only one order of magnitude beyond us. So this is just to give you like a value of who you're really dealing with, and so that's what the study is communicating.
Well, what's funny is when you read Mark chapter 2. Remember the paralyzed man who his friends actually had to crack open the roof of his house, and they had to lower the man on his bed so he could get to Jesus, right? Do you remember that story in Mark chapter 2?
Yeah.
And as Jesus is in his house talking with the Pharisees, so basically this is starting in Mark chapter 5, and this is already going into the story of the man. As a matter of fact, let me just read it from the beginning for some people who just don't know, because we do have some people actually watching right now. But starting off, it says, several days later, Jesus returned to Capernaum, and it was reported that he was at home. Such a large crowd gathered that there wasn't room for them, even in front of the door. Jesus was speaking his message to them when some people came and brought him a paralyzed man being carried by 4 men. Since they couldn't bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof over the place where he was. They dug through and let down the mat on which the paralyzed man was lying. When Jesus saw their faith, he told the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now the scribes were sitting there arguing among themselves. "Why did this man talk this way? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once, Jesus knew in his spirit what they were saying to themselves. "Why are you arguing about such things among yourselves?" he asked. "Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or 'Get up, pick up your mat, and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he told the paralyzed man, "I say to you, get up, pick up your mat, and go home." So the man got up, immediately picked up his mat, and went out in front of all of them. As a result, all of the people were amazed and began to glorify God as they kept on saying, "We have never seen anything like this." And the funniest thing about all of this, the Pharisees and scribes are like, who does this man think he is? Only God can forgive sins. And what most people don't catch is Jesus knew what they were thinking. They never said it out loud. That's freaky. I mean, can you imagine that, General? Like,
that's why Jesus told me. Like literally, like I've come to the realization that sometimes he's just like, you know what, I'm just going to troll them.
They're thinking, and then he tells some man to get up, and some paralyzed man just gets up and start walking. I mean, Nobody would believe you if you ever told them something like that.
So yeah, I hope. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I hope that wasn't too technical, or was that
No,
helpful in some ways?
it was just fine, and it was just adding on to what I was saying about the hyperdimensions and stuff like that. And you know what's funny? I had made an argument, and the premise in the argument basically was, or the premises were, if there is a God that does exist, the only way we would know if this God existed is if He revealed Himself to us. I mean, how else would you know? And well, the other aspect
Exactly.
is right, and so you wouldn't
Right.
know.
You got it.
And,
Yeah.
and so the ironic part about all of this is, ironically, this ancient Near Eastern book talks about some guy who reveals himself in the nature of three people that we can't even really understand why he did this until hundreds of years after. But now come to find out, if God hadn't revealed himself in the nature of three, it still wouldn't have made sense to us in a way we could even make sense to it now. And in a way, I mean, we can't even fully comprehend it. But the best way he could have done it was the way he did do it, revealing himself in the nature of three, because of course we live in three dimensions.
Exactly. Um, it's like that hand that's just hovering above Mr. and Mrs. Flap, where they would have been oblivious. I mean, they could philosophically debate their reality, like, what's the meaning of their existence. They won't even know that they're inside a computer screen. All they'll know from their perspective is whatever the reality is to them, like kind of like the Matrix sort of thing.
Right. And,
Um,
and you know what, the best way, like if we really were two-dimensional people, the best way God could reveal himself to us as two-dimensional people is reveal himself in the nature and the person of a two-dimensional being.
exactly, and notice how it's not limiting God, because Muslims will make the point that, oh, how can God become a human? Um, yeah, he can do that because he's already so many orders of magnitude higher than the existence that we are. And so just like the finger entering into the screen, naturally, the three-dimensional finger will become a two-dimensional circle. It's a cross-section of the finger. So this 11 plus dimensional God can easily take the form of a man, and hence the incarnation, hence the hypostatic union, all those technical terms. So it's just amazing to see how philosophical words and theological doctrines and creeds, where they didn't actually understand this. It was more of, well, I just take this by faith because this is how it's been revealed to us. And now through the benefit of science, we can actually, you see, they didn't need the science in those days, because that wasn't the debate or the argument back then. Back then, it was more about what does the scripture say, etc. Today, it's more about explain this to me scientifically. And the Trinity fits the current model of the universe perfectly. So therefore, it can't have been a human invention.
It's something that transcends space and time. You know what's funny? I know, Jerome, I know you were like a strong concordist, and I wouldn't say I'm a concordist or an accommodationist. I honestly think the accommodation view, I, I, I put the accommodation view on the same level as I put younger creationism, in the sense that I understand younger creationists had good intentions when they first came up with their interpretation, but they seem to put the interpretation over the word of God. And the same thing goes for the accommodationists, where they put the ancient Near Eastern interpretation over the word of God. And the word of God is so much more than just the ancient Near Eastern book.
Amen. Yeah.
Right. And so you have these people like biologos are accommodationists. They aren't concordant. And they say that the Bible is just an ancient Near Eastern, or the Old Testament is an ancient Near Eastern creation story or creation mythos to counter the mythos of the day. And that's true. There is some truth to that, but it's so much more. And so I like Carol Hill's worldview approach, where she basically said that the Bible was written in such a way where God accommodated the knowledge to the people's understanding of that day. And he used that same text to reach out to all generations at all times and all places. And so that somebody like me or you who are 21st century moderns, we could look into the text and we can see a scientific understanding of the text. But somebody living, hundreds of thousands of years ago, they can get their understanding from the text. But the text has never changed. It's the same Bible. However, we can get both interpretations from the Bible, and they're both correct. How is this possible?
Yeah. That you're hitting two birds with one stone, sort of thing. It's like, because but I don't deny the accommodationist view. In fact, I uphold it. It's just that it's like saying, are you a Calvinist or an Arminian? Well, I'm both. So I'm a concordist accommodationist.
Accommodationist.
Yeah. So because you can't deny, like what you just said, you have to be honest with that. And lo and behold, it's just amazing. Amazing in the sense of if it's just a man-made document, but yeah, it's amazing to see it correlating with modern science as well. It's unbelievable.
And I had learned something new yesterday, as a matter of fact. I had already known it, but I dug deeper into it, and I didn't know there were two great oxygenation events. So there was the first great oxygenation event that was about 2.5 billion years ago, and that was actually in Genesis 1:3, where God says, "Let there be light," and so the atmosphere changes from like really, really hazy to a clear state to what it is today. But I didn't know. And it's funny, reasons to believe, Ross actually said this is where photosynthesis can take place. But if there is no living organism in the earth at that time, when the sun comes through the clouds, where the sunlight can finally come through the clouds, why would there need to be photosynthesis? Organisms living on the earth until day 4. I'm sorry, day 5. That's like 500 million years ago.
Yeah, but organisms are already existing in verse 2, so it's a type of organism that doesn't require photosynthesis. There's a byproduct of oxygen that then gives off a transforming nature of the atmosphere, which then results in sunlight coming through, but not directly, more like a cloudy day sort of thing. And then that leads into a water cycle, then that leads into landmass, then that leads into the vegetation, which require that ongoing sunlight, which then leads into the great oxygenation event, which would be would lead into the Cambrian explosion and things like that. And so that would be
there was a mineral oxygenation event where the mineral oxygen sinks filled up, and then you get life on land coming about because so I didn't know about the second one, but I was just expounding more on it, and I'm like, wow, this is really crazy. But here's the funny thing about it, General. I was making my own model without looking at the RTB one that they have on their website, and I was just looking at natural history, and I was looking at Genesis, and I was trying to pair the days up myself, and it fits like a glove, man. It fits like a glove. And I actually didn't know. On the internet, they actually need to change the plants on the fossil record, because I remember looking at I was trying to find out, how old were the first plants? And so at first I'm like, wait a minute. These plants are, I think they were they were younger than the animals. I'm sorry. So the number they gave me was younger than animals. And then I actually found out that's not true anymore, because now we had new evidence that shows that, first we had plant isotopes we found, and that dated back a couple million years before animals. And now we have like the plant fossils, where these fossils go back to about like 200 million years before the first animals.
So that's actually really funny because Michael Shermer made the point that because plants appear on day 3, and that's really early. I mean, yeah, you have cyanobacteria and the really early life forms way back in verse 2, but as far as advanced phyla, so animals and things like that, Michael Shermer made the point that Genesis got it backwards, that vegetation first, then animals. And then in 2009, they found a paper in Nature was released on the fact that they found fossils of plants, or even isotopic evidence of that, way back, like that would fit in the category of day 3 of Genesis. And so, again, it fits like a glove, like you just said.
And the funniest thing about it too is because I know there's a lot of atheists, right? I know there's a lot of atheists who will say, yeah, the Bible is an ancient Near Eastern book, and from their perspective, they would have done this and that. Like I know there's a atheist guy, a really smart guy, Floyd, in the Great Debate Community. I know Floyd; he's a really smart guy, and I think he does accept ancient Near Eastern cosmology as an atheist. But I think what would destroy his atheism is the concordance approach, and I think it does a pretty good job challenging his disbelief in the Bible, because if you accept the concordance approach, and then you also accept ancient Eastern cosmology, I mean, wouldn't common sense tell you, wait a minute, there's something more going on in this book? I mean, obviously, this book transcends like regular human writing. I mean, because it would be impossible for these people to know about current scientific events, and so nobody's denying, right? Like at least I'm not saying that these people had knowledge about future scientific discoveries, because they didn't. But what I am saying is it was the fact that it was God who knew about these future scientific discoveries and etc. I mean, he was the one who made the world, so of course, like he would have gave them correct information about how he created it. And so I just think the concordance approach, if the guy Floyd or any other atheist actually really does look into this, I think at first showing them ancient Near Eastern cosmology and then explaining to them, but wait a minute, this same text actually fits for today's scientific discoveries. How is that possible? I think that it could be a very powerful tool in helping somebody become a Christian. I don't know if it would be the only tool you would need, but it would just be one of those things that you put in your cumulative evidence bag.
I'm just going to read from Hugh Ross's Navigating Genesis. I have his book here, and on page 51, he says, going back to that plant thing, he says, today more direct evidence supports the biblical statement that vegetation preceded the proliferation of animal life, especially the proliferation identified as the Cambrian explosion. In fact, land plants likely existed for hundreds of millions of years before the Cambrian event. So in 2009, which is what I just mentioned, 2 biologists reported in Nature the discovery of isotope evidence indicating that photosynthetic life was as abundant on continental land masses for the 200 million years prior to the Cambrian explosion. So don't forget, Cambrian explosion is about 543 million years. So you're talking 743 million years ago that this vegetation. And then he continues, more recently, so this is in 2009, but more recently, a team of paleontologists uncovered extensive fossil evidence for non-marine eukaryotic life forms that date back as early as 1.2 billion years. The team said of their fossil findings, quote, they offer direct evidence of eukaryotes living in freshwater, aquatic, and subaerially exposed habitats during the Proterozoic era. Can all the structures this research team found be attributed to vegetation? Probably not, but some may be the remains of early animal life. In one sense, however, no proof of Precambrian plant life is needed, based on the principle that wherever animal life flourishes, the vegetation it feeds upon must be available already. So yeah, that's actually an interesting thing, that even before the findings, if you have animal life, let's just say, or some form of advanced organism way back, you're talking nearly 1 billion years away, you need vegetation because that's like the food source. Even if there's no evidence for the vegetation, that needs to be there in order for the other life to exist. So it's just amazing how before you have advanced animal life in the Genesis account, before day 5, this fits perfectly. Already in day 3, you have vegetation, photosynthetic life. It's just an amazing correlation.
Yeah, and especially the water cycle, which is actually, the firmament. When I first read that in Genesis 2, I did get the water cycle out of it, but I didn't know anything about ancient Near Eastern cosmology. So
yeah. So that's why, like, have you looked at Job 37 and the many characteristics of different types of water in different states, different types of precipitation that's needed for advanced life. So the water cycle is not just liquid, ice, liquid, gas. There's many types of precipitation you need, which this leads into fine tuning now. So yeah, you can see the day 2 rakia, the waters above, waters below, that sort of thing, as a cyclic water cycle. Because I mean, I'm appealing to a concordance approach here. The waters below would be the oceans. The waters above would be in the heavens. The ancient Near Eastern perspective would be the blue sky above is, why is it blue? Because there must be water up there. But then I take the point that rakia here could be the troposphere, and so now you're dealing with modern scientific perspective, which is again equally as accurate. So yeah.
yeah, and like, so like when you usually talk to like non-believers about this type of stuff, do they usually just hand wave this stuff away? I mean, like we have a I can't even.
Yeah. Did you see my post in the GDC?
No, I didn't see it.
What? Okay, let me screen share what happened.
I feel like, do they just say, we don't care? Like, what do you say to this? Like, how do you respond?
Yeah, you'll see. So I'm just going to share my screen. Now look at also what I posted here. I posted a physics photo. I don't know if you can. I think if I zoom in, maybe it'll work.
No, I see it.
You can see it.
Oh my gosh! I was about to say, is that Maxwell's equation for light? Oh my, I'm so off. I'm sorry.
No, this is the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. It's it's a Lagrange, like it's to do with the emergence of time in a quantum event. So Hebrews 11:3 says, I'm using the ISV here, it says, by faith we understand that, and in the verse it literally says time. So by faith we understand that time was created by the Logos. Well, here's the equation. There's the psi symbol, so you're dealing with quantum mechanics here. So here's the equation by Wheeler DeWitt that I took out of the text. That because this is when they make equations, they're making it after a long line of derivation, and then they brought it out to this equation here to describe the phenomenon of time appearing in a quantum singularity. So, which would be the Big Bang, basically. So, by faith, we understand that. And just a simple statement as time, right? Well, here's the equation. Was created by the Logos. So just to go back to the post, let me just click on the post here. So because, in fact, one second, let me go back here. So you see what Camille did here? So Camille Gregor wrote, he says, Hunter Bailey, actually let me zoom in for you. Hunter Bailey has claimed that the Genesis creation account matches our current scientific understanding of the universe. Well, actually, in this discussion, that's where I joined them. And Hunter used the diagram, this diagram.
Oh, yeah, the creation model. Yeah.
Yes, it's coming up. This diagram, yeah.
Bro, you know what I really think RTB should put in this model? Or maybe you could refine it. Put the evolution of the eye in there, bro. I think that's really like the eye evolved 500 million years ago. I think that's
yeah.
the most like.
I think
because I keep hearing ideas.
This can be updated,
Yeah, how could the eye have evolved and stuff like that? And like when you look at the evolution of the eye, like it is ingenious. Oh my gosh.
So he's like, what he did was he made another chart where proposed sequence of events and Genesis sequence of events. And notice he tried to basically show that there's an inconsistency because the stars and the lights in the sky in day 4 that's mentioned, he thinks that they're created in day 4, and yet we know that in science that they date back to 13 billion light years and so on. Again, I can explain that away. So this is where I respond by saying, I appreciate you taking the time to make a comparison chart. But again, there are a few problems with it. You said one could claim that Genesis is not told in sequence. Well, here's the thing. The scientific sequence of the natural events as seen on my chart are correct. There's no denying this. And the creation sequence as described in Genesis is correct. There is no reordering. There is no poetic allegory. I'm arguing that the sequence is a literal chronology that is one-to-one correlation. Floyd says, I think you simply are simply practicing a post hoc eisegesis with no consideration to a disciplined approach to interpreting the Bible, such as the historical, grammatical, hermeneutical method. Either you think the ancient writers of the Bible are simply taking dictation from a divine source with no understanding what they were writing, or they had the same understanding of our current cosmological models. Now here's the the interesting thing about this bit. What was written? So this is where it comes into the accommodation context. Yeah, they were understanding the cosmology of their own day, and that's why when you read the Genesis account, there's the ancient Near Eastern perspective. But what about the fact that Peter writes in 1 Peter 1 that they actually did not even understand why certain things were said the way they were said? So, for example, Peter, in fact, do you want to go there? Let me just go there and show you. Let me just open up the software.
Well, I know this has been a thing. Steve has said this too, and Floyd has said this, and maybe some other atheists might say this, but they'll say, "Oh, this is just post hoc after the fact." But
Yeah,
here's the
it's
fact:
not.
this it can't be post hoc after the fact because they're making it seem like we changed the words and we changed the text. I mean, this has been here for how many 3,500 years? It's the same words.
Yeah. So notice what Peter says. In fact, before I get to Peter, let's go to Paul. Notice what he says here in Romans 15:4. For everything that was written long ago was written to instruct us. So how did Moses ever think about that one day there will be a Paul that will use his writings? Well, obviously he didn't. But if there's a divine source guiding them, then this divine source is omniscient, and this divine source will know that the writings that are taking place at the time of Moses will be used and appreciated and will make more sense at the time when Paul was writing. So everything that was written long ago was written to instruct us so that we might have hope through the endurance and encouragement that the scriptures give us. Notice that the accommodation and the concordist approach of Genesis definitely gives us endurance, encouragement in light of science, the scientific debate.
Right. As a matter of fact, Jim, this is when I usually use when not even talking about Genesis, just talking about like the person of Jesus, right? Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, there's no good evidence for Jesus. So I always talk about how Mark talks about or I'm sorry, Luke, because Luke was a doctor. Luke records how Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was sweating like blood. And people are like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
We actually found out the diagnosis for this. It's called hematidrosis. This is an actual condition people get where they start to sweat blood, and we usually see this in patients who are about to go on death row.
Right.
So did Luke write down Jesus was sweating blood because he knew hundreds of years in the future we will find out about hematidrosis and we would just think it's so cool? Or maybe he just wrote down what he saw.
All right.
And so now you give them two options to choose from. And so, I mean, it's either one or the other because this ancient Jew couldn't have known about hematidrosis, or he just recorded Jesus sweating blood. And now you have to actually admit Jesus was a historical person. So,
and so look at Peter. He says, even the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours carefully researched and investigated the salvation. Why would they need to do this if they already understood it? And they tried to find out what era or specific time, and so in this case, the prophecies of Jesus, right? So they try to find out what era, specific time, the spirit of the Messiah. So Jesus, the pre-existent Jesus, was inspiring them. Kept referring to when he predicted the sufferings of the Messiah and the glories that would follow. And look at this. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves. So, going back to Floyd says, either you think the ancient writers of the Bible were simply taking dictation from a divine source with no understanding what they were writing, or they had the same understanding of what current. Well, actually, no, they didn't have any form of understanding because it was cryptic for the time being. It was not all of it was completely obscure. There was use of it in their own context, but there's a cryptic nature to the text for the sole purpose of keeping it away from the angels. And I think we discussed this last time, didn't we, Wayne? That Satan could not know the plan because if he did, then that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So exactly.
Yeah.
So it was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves, but you, in regard to the things that have now been announced to you by those who brought you the good news. So again, I mean, when I look at Genesis 1, I can see this as God speaking to me right now in the scientific context. Yes, I can see it in an ancient Near Eastern context, but it's too much of a coincidence that it matches modern science as well. And that's the amazing thing about it. And by the way, just quickly, with Steve, just going back to sharing my what I wrote here. Steve actually saw this. So this is what I wrote. For everyone, just making sure you can see this. Yep. So for everyone interested in the Genesis model that I propose, this Google Drive link. So I gave them the Google Drive link to my talks. And then I said, I advise you carefully read through each slide, see how I fit the Genesis narrative and all that. Note, I take the ancient Near Eastern perspective seriously, as this shouldn't be neglected. Then I linked my YouTube series, the Young Earth's Argument series. And then below are two images I uploaded, where one is a chart showcasing natural history alongside Genesis 1. So that's the chart you've seen before. The other image is a juxtaposition of a Wheeler-DeWitt equation alongside Hebrews 11:3. Now check this out, Wayne. Making the point that space-time did indeed have a physical start, as the verse states. By faith we understand that, here's the word, time was created by the word of God. And St. Augustine, in commenting on this verse, says, quote, I see then that time is a certain kind of extension. Do you know what this is? This is special relativity. This Augustine is saying that time is a physical, property of the universe. And so he says time therefore begins rather from the creation than creation from time, but both are from God. And so at least Augustine saw time as a physical property of the universe, a far cry from the physical notions of his day, because they didn't see time as a physical property. They thought the universe was eternal. And so for more information on the quantum entanglement of time and all that, so check out that link. So again, a concordance approach. Why does Augustine, looking at Hebrews 11:3, why does he conclude this, which again matches what Einstein predicted in his field equations? I mean, it's just, again, an amazing correlation.
Refresh me on special and general relativity again. I know the two papers Einstein wrote, but I haven't talked about this for a while, ever since man, I had broke this down to my class like last summer. Oh my God.
Special relativity is to do with the fact that there's no special frame of reference. There's no or absolute frame of reference. Special relativity is to do with an object. Well, you can look at it into a three-dimensional perspective, but usually the math associated with special relativity is in a 2D plane, where basically you're dealing with increasing velocity. That the faster you go, the slower time is. So
there you go. It's kind of like the falling elevator analogy Einstein had came up with, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because then the math is so. In fact, the amazing thing about the math associated with that stuff is quite simply the Pythagorean rule, and then from there you make your argument. But general relativity is taking that to the next level, and that is, okay, a body of mass will now bend space-time. So
the fabric of space-time and gravity, and well, in a sense, yeah, anything with enough mass creates its own gravitational pull, stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So the bending of space-time causes or the larger the mass, the gravitational well that's created. So the gravitational well is the bending of space-time. The bigger the gravitational well, the slower time is. So, or the slower the clock, or just physical time, really. But the further away you are from the gravitational well, the faster time is. So
Right, and
that's
gravitational time dilation, right?
yes, yeah. So gravitational lensing, things like that. There's a quote. Let me just get this quote because I put it in my Ephesians study by I'm drawing a mental blank now, but if I open up my study, you'll see it. Yes, it's John Wheeler. Oh, yeah. the same guy, Wheeler DeWitt. So John Wheeler. He says, space-time tells matter how to move. Matter tells space-time how to curve. So, yeah, you have the flip of special and general relativity together.
And you know what's funny? I didn't always like science, right? Because when I first started researching Christianity, when I became a Christian, I was like, I'm never going to get into the science stuff or whatever. But the thing that actually made me get into science was the fact that I wanted to find out if Christianity was true. And so people are like, no, look at the science about this, look at the science about that. And yeah, I became a younger creationist, and now I'm out of younger creationism now. But I mean, that was the main focus of me getting into science. I didn't just get into science because I just, wanted to get into it. But in my frame of reference, when you study science, you're studying how God created the universe.
Pretty much.
And so that's what made it interesting to me. And so, like, from an atheistic standpoint of science, it's kind of boring because the whole reason why I study science is so I can study God. I mean, when I actually go out and when I look into, like, the spirit sphere and the astrophysics and white dwarf stars and stuff like that, I mean, I am literally looking at the creation of God, and I think that is absolutely amazing. Like, I'm in a sense picking the mind of God and seeing what makes God tick a little bit. But from an atheistic, like, frame of reference, is boring. Like, you're just looking at what the universe just decided to burp out one day for no reason at all.
Yeah, I mean, remember the Romans 12:1 passage that present your bodies as a living sacrifice, for this is your scientific worship.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, for the Christian, I mean, like, doing science is amazing, man. It's
Science is actually this is the amazing thing. Science is meant. It should be. Christians should be at the forefront of science. And young earth creationists are so afraid of I can't have that view, and I can't have this work and that work, and it's an evil thing, and science is, well, even Calvinists would say, oh, man is depraved and science is lacking and only the Bible is authoritative. Well, I don't, the more I go out into nature, and I just sometimes when I'm alone, say on the beach or in a park somewhere, and if I were to lay back and just look at the sky, and then I see the cloud distribution, you know how clouds, they slowly move through the sky, and just seeing how I'm thinking of the mathematics associated with the gas distribution of those clouds and the water, because it's water condensation there. But it's just things like that that make me realize, just look at how mathematical everything is. Right now, there's some bird chirping in the tree. The sounds that the bird is chirping, again, is a mathematical rhythm. for example, I can use Fourier analysis to record that bird's chirp and mix it into like a song. And simultaneously, there's the cloud patterns. There's physics involved with the Coriolis effect and wind velocities and the particles bouncing off each other, and then there's the grass beneath me that's growing. There's gravity holding down the earths together. There's me, my own body, the way my heart pumps due to electrical pulses, and like it's all these things that just runs through my mind. I'm thinking to myself, as a Christian, I can really appreciate the intelligibility of this universe. It's just amazing. It's like a complex organism in itself. And to have other Christians that see it as some evil thing, I think is just it's just absolutely ridiculous.
It's sad, man. It's sad, and it's sad that a lot of Christians think that you can't really trust what your eyes are seeing, right? Like, a lot of Christians like.
Yeah, I know.
It
just shows they don't go out. They don't actually go out and appreciate the world out there.
Yeah, well, my pastor actually said, Wayne, maybe you should back off on the science so much. Maybe you shouldn't really get into the scientific stuff and the evidences for Christianity, because when the Antichrist comes one day, what if the evidence changes and the evidence becomes deceptive and you become deceived and maybe you don't believe in Jesus anymore? I'm just like, it
bro,
comes to a point, yeah, like it comes to a point where and Dr. Bruce Walkie, he actually I don't know if you know who he is, but he's like a Christian theologian.
Yeah, I like he's the Gleason Archer equivalent.
Yeah, and he goes and he's talking about Christians can accept evolution, and I like what he said. He said it comes to a point where when Christians don't accept practical applications of modern science, it makes Christianity seem like a cult. I mean, like, can you imagine? Oh my God, bro, you haven't seen. I don't think you've seen it. The news has actually went down to the Creation Museum, and they started recording like all of the stuff that the Creation Museum is advocating. And now that I'm outside of younger creationism, if I didn't know any better, I would think Christianity was a cult.
Yeah. And that's, praise God you didn't conclude that, but it is a legitimate point that you raise, that Christians take stock at what you're doing. The early church would be ashamed at most of the Christians today at the way they present the faith. I mean, Paul specifically says this is your scientific worship. Everything in life points to the glory of God. You're meant to be polymaths. A polymath is someone who perfects every art. Why don't we do that? And it's sad.
It is sad. Doctor, what's his name, Makio Kaku, or I can't even pronounce his name.
That Asian guy. Yeah.
He made a video, and it's on a big thing. And I don't know if he's a believer or not, but he said he's compelled that he's found evidence for God, and if there is a God, God is a mathematician. And I said, congratulations, man. You get it. You get it.
Congratulations, you get it.
And I don't think, and I think, it's funny. I think if you met a Christian, not even like heroes, but if he just met a Christian who had a practical view of science and Genesis, I guarantee you he could become a believer. I guarantee you, because I think he's open to it.
Yeah.
I don't know about Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a little too prideful.
He's a little bit what?
Too prideful. No, I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about religion, and he just needs to stay in his lane. He just, I'm just like, Neil, stop it. Just stop. Bill and I, and it seems like they get so turned off by Christianity from a scientific perspective because of the younger creation interpretation, but I don't think they've ever heard about order of creationism. I've yet to hear a scientist say, you know what, these order of creationists are nuts. Like,
Yeah, that and notice again through God's providence, I reckon the GDC community, Great Debate community, they had a taste of Fazal Rana first, and then both of them again at the same time, and not much criticism. In fact, they were very pleased by what they were saying.
well,
Furthermore,
have you seen Steve's comments on the last video with you and Fuzz? I mean, the comments were kind of really abrasive and really like standoffish. You know, I saw some comments saying, you know, these two Christians are really dumb, or you know, I heard the post hoc ad hoc
during the live feed. Yeah.
No, it wasn't in the live feed. These are in the comments. You can go look at them now if you can see it. But I don't know.
No, yeah, but no, that. Well, those are the people that don't actually come into the hangout and actually have a discussion. But the ones who, most of the non-Christians that interacted with Fuzz and even afterwards with you, or even, for example, just in my interaction with everyone, at least, and I'll quote Steve. Like, Steve admits that the model that I propose, which is very similar to RTV's, it's quite robust. Now, he says that he doesn't agree with it yet, and and I kind of joke with him saying, you know, Steve, one day you will see the truth. Like, you'll finally go, you know, you'll finally have to admit to yourself that you can't deny it. And he actually admitted to that. He said, yep, I know it's brilliant. And so I think, but notice, Wayne, it's more to do with presentation. Yeah, you can have all the content that you know, but are you going to present it like how Ken Hovind presents it? Or are you going to actually engage with their questions? That's the difference. And
Well,
because that's a scientific method, and
you know,
you're being honest with the model.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really think like Steve and like the other people who are not believers in the community. I don't know if they really do reject the Bible for scientific reasons alone. Because no, Steve says, you know, I don't care about like the theology, whatever. But it comes a point where like theology does matter. Like, because even when I was becoming an evolutionary creationist, the process for me was understanding, all right, how does evolution work? I found out, all right, this is how evolution works. There's pretty good evidence for it. But then, you know, I still had some theological gaps, you know, in my reasoning. And so I needed to find out the answer to those questions last. And then I bridged the gap. So I don't really know if it's all of like a scientific issue. Maybe it's some deeper issues. But I mean, the scientific answers, they do help. But I don't think it really does bridge the gap completely. I think you need a good understanding of both theology and science. So. Because it'll come to a thing where, okay, you can give the scientific evidence, right, through Genesis, but then theological questions come up like, well, how could these people have known about this stuff? Why is this stuff written in the Bible and this stuff happened hundreds of, and those aren't scientific questions. Those are theological questions. I mean, Floyd, he jumps from this isn't scientifically accurate. Well, sure, Genesis does talk about the water cycle, but what does that mean about the people who wrote it?
Yeah.
And so you're constantly jumping from science to theology. And I know Steve wants to jump onto the theology, but you can't talk about the Bible and science without talking about the theology also, if you want to get somebody saved. Now, you could present the science and say, you know, this scientific model is scientifically correct. And then they'll say, yeah, that's cool. But I mean, I guess if you want to get somebody saved, you're going to have to talk about the theology soon. But as a matter of fact, I like Well, actually, Hugh Ross didn't necessarily come up with this analogy. I had came up with this analogy from inspiration from Hugh Ross. But one of the a really good question people do ask though is how come there was so much death in the world even before Adam did sin, right? And I thought about this for a while, and how the universe is finely tuned for life and stuff like that. And I actually don't believe anybody could go back in time. Um, with me being a Molinist, I think if somebody did go back in time and change anything, they probably would destroy the space time continuum. In my views, because I think everything is finely tuned.
What, go back in time to prove that?
Well, no, if somebody went back in time and changed anything, I mean, if you change like even the tiniest raindrop from hitting a blade of grass, you probably will kill us all. Because
Yeah,
things,
you're talking like Dr. Brown now. From Back to the Future.
yeah, you probably would, and I say that because everything that has happened on this timeline was supposed to happen exactly the way it did happen. Because if you change one thing in the past, you change everything else drastically from happening. And so yeah, you can stop a raindrop from hitting a blade of grass, but you also might stop Christ from dying on the cross.
Mm.
And so everything that did happen on this timeline was supposed to happen, good or bad, because God uses all of the evil and all of the death and all of the suffering on this finite timeline so he can bring us into the new creation. And so, yeah, these things may be bad for us from our frame of reference, but it's actually pretty relative looking at the whole spectrum. And so, why, for somebody to ask, why is there evil in the world? I guess the best answer for that is God uses all of the evil and all of the suffering and all of the death in all times and all places so it can bring us into the new creation. So God actually uses it for his glory in a sense. So.
Anyway, bro, I don't think we'll end with that. You need to sleep.
Yeah, so yeah, I do because I gotta get up in a few hours. But I'll talk to you later, bro. It's been a good hangout, man. We gotta find some people to debate besides younger creationists. I'm tired of debating younger earthers.
Try and bring Peter Cordy again. Then.
Oh yeah, I just messaged him the link too. But between
Let's
Peter
have
Corey,
a
I
totally
would
random debate topic. That would be the King James only debate. I wanna
oh my gosh,
get him out of that first. Like
yeah, King James
somehow.
only.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you
I,
see
I
my
gotta.
comments on it?
I've been trying to see if I could talk to the Vigilant Christian again, and me and him just have like a discussion on his channel, not a debate, but an actual discussion where he talks. Like, remember when I was a younger creationist, I didn't even accept older of creationism, and I still brought you onto like my channel. We just talked about it, um, and I guess that even opened me up to the interpretation too, just because I always got the picture that order of creationists were like these really evil, maniacal people, and they twisted every Bible verse to every scripture, and they were just so. And, and I talked to you, and I'm like, this guy isn't that bad. He's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, but I'll talk to you later, bro.
All right, man. God bless. You have a good night's sleep.
All right, bro.